Good afternoon and welcome everyone to the regular board meeting of Wednesday, May 22nd. My name is Ian Morrison, and just prior to us getting underway today, I want to welcome everyone in our gallery and those watching at home. I'd like to firstly acknowledge that this meeting is taking place in the territory of the Coast Salish people. And I'd like to remind everyone around the table and in the audience to please put your electronic devices either on silent or perhaps maybe even turn them off if you're not using them. With that, we have an agenda before you. Is there any new business? Ms. Harrison.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, we have one new business item, which is a letter that is included in your electronic package. It's a correspondence item from the License Inspector and Bylaw Officers Association of BC. And that is the only new business item.
Can we have a motion to approve the agenda with that new business item? Moved by Director Smith, seconded by Director Marcotte. Any further discussion? All those in favor? Are there any opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Moving on to item 2, adoption of the minutes. The recommendation is that the minutes of the regular board meeting of May 8th, 2019 be adopted.
Moved by Director Stone, seconded by Director Sebring. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Are there any opposed? There's none opposed, the motion carries. Any business arising from the minutes?
There is none.
Now we come to number 4 on the agenda. This is our public input period. The policy is on the screens for everyone to see, and I welcome anyone to come forward and provide input to the board today.
First, I apologize for not coming to this morning's meeting. I'd like you to know why. It's not on your list of meetings on the cvrd.bc.ca agenda. And I wanted to support Mike Wilson's intention, I believe, to hold a public hearing on the results of the aquifer analyses. So I'm going to do it now, ask you to consider that I would like to see that happen, and that's why I'm here. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
You will fix the agenda thing on the website.
This is the first I've heard of it, and I would perhaps ask that you might check with our staff before you leave. It might have been in a different location. I thought I saw it published, but we can provide you with some help.
I'd have to charge you for the service.
Point well taken. Thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to provide input to the board today? Please come forward.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much. I'm speaking to CR1 on the agenda. My name is Jean Davis, and I am attending this afternoon in support of a letter that Leslie Schoberg and I wrote regarding the renaming of the community centre, and also in support of the Centre Commission's recommendation. Leslie Schoberg is with me here today, as well as Mary Ann Deacon. Both these ladies, well known in the Valley for their good works in the community, were an integral part of the original group which recognized the need for a community centre in the 1970s and worked unwaveringly for it to become a reality. Multiple numbers of families were moving into the area at that time, and there was a great need for a centre for the community to come together for organizational and cultural activities, as well as for sports and entertainment. How blessed we are that past governments, municipal, regional, and provincial, and taxpayers finally recognized our need so that the required referendum passed. We want you to know that visitors are in awe, particularly when they walk into our community theatre. Following the initial meeting when the recommendation from the Commission was made, after extensive research, to go back to the original Cowichan Community Centre name, Leslie and I wrote a letter to the Citizen newspaper saying that our hearts soared when we heard it. Some of you may remember the well-beloved Chief Dan George, author, poet, actor, chief of the Coast Salish Band in North Vancouver during the 1970s, who wrote a wonderful poem called My Heart Soars. After our letter was published, numerous people came up to one or both of us saying how grateful they were to us for having written it, and were in full agreement. I was delighted to read the following paragraph in a message from the chair of the CVRD board in the property tax leaflet which arrived yesterday, and I would like to read the paragraph. Working with residents is the key to the CVRD's success. Please stay engaged as we move forward on a number of issues in 2019. We are committed to providing you with opportunities for public participation in decision-making processes around the many critical issues we will face. We think that this renaming is a critical issue, not just to Leslie and me, but to many in the Cowichan Valley. It's our community and our centre. So please, let's return it to its original name, the Cowichan Community Centre, a name that's never really been lost to those who live here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Please come forward.
Hi, my name's Kathy Schmidt, and I'm also here to speak on behalf of CR1. I've grown up in the Cowichan Valley my whole entire life, and as a youth, we used to take swimming lessons at the fire hall. We used to dance at the Duncan United Church. Everything that we used to do, we used to be scattered within our community. And then this beautiful facility called the Cowichan Community Centre was built, where we could come together as one. I took my classes from Cowichan Secondary at the Cowichan Community Centre. I now rent the facility as the president, and I run a kids musical theater company, and we rent the theater. I'm also a volunteer and a season ticket holder for the Cowichan Valley Capitals and constantly use the arena. I have never, and I'm sorry, but I've never called it the Island Savings Center. I've grown up here. I am 50 years old, and I am going to continue to call it the Cowichan Community Center. And I really hope that you hear that the community has never given up that name. So the Island Savings Center, though a beautiful facility as it is, we've never called it that. And we would just like you guys to please support CR1, and let's put it back to the way it should be. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Hello, thank you for listening to us. I'm Marianne Deacon, and I support CR1 as well. I was part of OPREC years and years back when the whole community worked together, service clubs, individuals, committees, and created the money that built the thing. And it always has been, as Kathy said, heartfelt and the Cowichan Community Centre. Furthermore, when I was such as on the Elder College Board, one of our members, when it changed its name, never ever called it anything other than disparagingly the bank, because that former name didn't say it, but Cowichan Community Centre does. So I would thank all of you for please considering a return. Excuse me, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Chair, I'm Cliff Evans from Shawnigan Lake, and I'm delighted to see delegation number 1 and Domenico Yanni DiNardo, who is the son of our director Yanni DiNardo here. And he has really supported the Shawnigan Basin Society and the Shawnigan Watershed Roundtable. He has come with buses, lunches. In fact, tonight he said, this evening or this afternoon, his first question was, "Where's the popcorn?" And I said, "This isn't the Timber West." But he has really supported the Shawnigan community, and I suspect that he will continue to do so with Mosaic, and I hope we give him a real welcome and don't roast him here today, please. Bye.
Thank you, Mr. Evans.
Hello, I'm Ken Trainer. I'm the president of the Cowichan Lake and River Stewardship Society, and I'm here to speak in support of Agenda Item Staff Report 1. The current weir is inadequate to supply the flows we need for economic environmental requirements. I think we all know that. It was constructed in '57. It's served us well. It's provided adequate flows for 40 years, but lately it's failed to do so for 11 of the past 20 and 4 of the past 5 years. There's a serious trend going on there. We need to address it. Today, we're at July 19th, 2018 levels on the lake, just in case you haven't been watching it in detail like most of us that live up at the lake have. And if back in March, it fell to a historic lows. So folks of the lake have definitely taken notice, and we're concerned. Our current situation is not expected to improve and is posing significant threats to the ecology and the economy of the Cowichan Valley. But unlike some watersheds, we have a way to address the challenge. Constructing a new weir will build economic and ecological resilience for our community, and failure to do so will lead to the decimation of salmon runs and have severe economic and tourism impacts. This proposal will enable us to move forward with this important work and have it funded by senior levels of government. In our view, a win-win situation for the Cowichan Valley. The water use plan process carried out last year was an important and impressive achievement. It represents an excellent roadmap to building a solution for us all, and it showed how we can work together to accomplish it. Support for SR1, in our mind, is phase 2 of this process to building a new year, getting on with the detailed work. Moving the ball forward by sponsoring this proposal for funding sends a signal that we're doing our part here in the Valley, and we need other levels of government to step up and do theirs. It deserves your support. Please vote yes on SR1 today. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Hello, good afternoon, everybody. I appreciate the opportunity to speak. I'm Tom Rutherford, Executive Director of the Cowichan Watershed Board, and I had a lot of things I wanted to say, but Ken said them all. So, but I would like to make a couple of points. This proposal represents a partnership, and that's a partnership between CVRD, one of the largest First Nation in BC, Cowichan tribes, like the mill, a huge employer, Paper Excellence, and the Watershed Board. I'm proud to live in a community where First Nations, local government, industry, NGOs work together on tough issues and don't fight over them. And in my 37 years working with DFO, I worked all up and down the coast. I can tell you that's not the norm. The other thing I would like to say is that this really makes good economic sense. If successful, senior levels of government are going to inject millions of dollars into our community to be able to sustain our economic, ecological, and industrial needs. That's a good deal. And finally, I'm going to break the rules. I'm not supposed to make any personal references, but I would like to point out that you are lucky enough to have staff like Hamid, and Natalie, and Kate, who work really hard on this stuff and do a really good job. And I think you're very lucky to have people like that working on work like this, which I feel is super important. So thanks for listening.
Thank you very much. I think we've got time for one more. If you'd like to come up, I think we have about 3 minutes. Oh, 4
Hi.
minutes left.
Sheila Bell Irving from Shawnigan Lake. I didn't plan on speaking, but now I will. I understand the raising of the weir in Cowichan is important, but I'm going to be the canary in the coal mine here because that was what was done in Shawnigan in 1998 when the powers that be decided to raise the level of the lake by 2 feet and didn't tell any of us locals until we noticed that we didn't have beaches anymore in the September. And then, lo and behold, a Pineapple Express came through and completely flooded all of our homes, mine included, which then proceeded to fall apart and had to be rebuilt, which cost me over $150,000. They never lowered the level of the lake again, and I have never seen my beach again. And my dock, which was held together by cables, broke, which has now had to have pilings installed. And all of our shoreline has died. My cedars have died, my cattails died, my reeds died, because in the summertime, the water was meant to go down so that they would be exposed to the air to then propagate and grow some more. But they don't, because they're drowned now. And we have shoreline erosion that's happening at a rapid rate now because our shoreline is now 2 feet below what the level of the lake used to be from my memory onwards. I have pictures of my mother on the beach. I have pictures of my grandmother on the beach. I have pictures of my children on the beach until 1998 when we no longer have a beach. So I understand the need to hold more water. I also understand that logging takes away the trees, which are the water keepers of the watershed, and slowing that down would help to hold more water. I'd like to see, if this does go forward, that you can help the people who are on the shoreline, whose docks could possibly break, who have to put in deeper pilings now because the wharves are going to pop right off the pilings that they had. When they did that in '98, we had 3 houseboats floating down the lake because they popped right off their pilings because they weren't used to getting that high. So just to be the canary in coal mine here and to show what happened in Shawnigan, just take that into consideration in what you're doing in Cowichan, because the same thing can happen there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think we've got 2 minutes left, so please come forward and maybe you can.
I'll be very brief.
Wrap up for us.
Stefan Burkhardt, owner and strata developer, speaking to CR 2.9. I'm sorry that some of you have heard my remarks before, but first I would like to thank the directors for voting against the variance a week ago, not for my sake, but because it is in line with how the community feels as expressed through the APC. I've been at a suitable development for my former property in Cherry Point since 2006 until my third DP in 2016 for estate homes in line with the upscale area, costing more than $100,000 per lot to develop to the highest standards, with my hope to do justice to this special large parcel. Development of Lot 5, whose owner applied for the variance, is becoming the opposite of my intention to preserve its unique rural residential character. It's turning into a light industrial site, mostly covered in gravel and buildings, vehicles, and trailers, exploding the reasonable bounds of a home-based business. An increased footprint would further exacerbate this situation. Ms. Hovey told me that such variances were normally not granted by the board. I could not get a satisfactory answer from her as to why she had recommended to approve it, despite the APC voting against it. I have serious concern about the enormous 5,600 square foot size without any buffer to the Strata Road adjacent lots and the Cherry Point Road, Kingscourt Road intersection. A 2.5 acre lot provides plenty of space for large rural residents without expanding the footprint by a considerable 23%.
You've got 30 seconds.
Okay. The plan shows trees surrounding the lot, most of which have been felled, including old specimens as declared by the VRD arborist. It also shows an expanded pond overflow draining onto Cherry Point Road, which I don't believe is correct or allowed. To accommodate this large housing cluster, a second access is planned, which is not likely to be granted by the strata. This highly visible development is not in line with RR2, degrading our neighborhood and bringing down my and other owners' property values. For these reasons, I oppose the variance.
Thank you very much.
How did I do?
Little over.
Eh.
Good job.
Okay.
Now we move on to section 5, delegations, and I would like to invite to come forward from Mosaic Forest Management. I think I got this right. Domenico Yanni DiNardo. Welcome, Domenico.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, everybody. As we've heard, it's Domenico Yanni DiNardo, and it's always great to be back here at the Cowichan Valley Regional District Board. It's very efficient for me personally. I do most of my visiting with my family at this time, and as you can see, I've got a lot of the family in the audience today too, but unsolicited, and thanks for that, Cliff. There you go. Yeah, no popcorn. I'm here today as the Vice President, Forest and Sustainability for a company you may have heard of called Mosaic Forest Management, which is the timberland manager for 2 companies you've probably heard of, Timber West and Island Timberlands. And the reason I'm here speaking as Mosaic is because the owners of Island Timberlands and Timber West affiliated the 2 companies late last year, and that's now allowing us to coordinate our forestry management and also our marketing opportunities. What that means is that the company is 100% Canadian owned still, Mosaic and Island Timberlands and Timber West, the parent companies, and we are owned wholly by the pension plans for the public sector of British Columbia, Alberta, and the federal public sector pension plan. We continue to be a predominantly second growth operation. We do our harvesting on regenerated forests on private land. We also have a tree farm license north of the Campbell River, which includes areas near Port McNeill and also the Great Bear Rainforest. It's not on this slide here, but we also have a significant forest management service that we provide to other tenure holders like First Nations, private owners, to manage their forests and market their wood for them. So we're very much all over the coast one way or the other. And it involves over 3,000 people. So you don't see them. It happens quietly every morning before most people wake up, but 3,000 people get up, go to work for Mosaic before dawn and before the birds, and work to produce, to make this resource real. 100% of our forest is certified. Thousands of hectares have been donated or traded or contributed to conservation initiatives over the life of Island Timberlands and Timber West, now Mosaic. 10 million trees were planted just this spring. 2,500 different vendors and suppliers make up the supply chain of Mosaic, most of them being in British Columbia. We're the first company to achieve Progressive Aboriginal certification in British Columbia. Last year, we paid $13 million in property taxes. And over the last 10 years, we've contributed over $10 million in community investments and sponsorships, including First Nations cultural opportunities. The values that we live by at Mosaic are simple but important. Safety and wellness is the priority. Nothing supersedes it. As we pursue the quest to be the Asia-Pacific leader in sustainable timberlands, we know that that can only happen if we're the safest company. People, to get out of bed that early in the morning and to go to work in most weather conditions, you have to be dedicated, you have to believe in the resource. And Mosaic is structured and mandated to make sure that people are empowered and engaged to do that every day. Sustainability, I'll talk about that a bit more before I'm done, but certainly science guides our management prescriptions, and we're continually supporting research and deploying that as it becomes available every day, everywhere on our land base. Integrity, I'll talk about that a bit more, but certainly a company of our geographic footprint and the communities and territories for which we operate, we're going to need a lot of respectful relationships to make that happen, and that's a priority for all of our personnel. And ultimately, the last point there, superior performance. We're owned by public sector pension funds, and it's important that they make a reasonable return on this investment, and their long-term sustainable time horizon is very important for what we do. Did that just happen? So, all right, well, see you at Christmas, Ma, anyway. In terms of safety, it is a priority for us. We continue to work to engineer the risk out of forestry, putting more people in machines, deploying scientific solutions for instance, cameras on machines to make sure people can see more of what they're doing. All injuries are preventable. We're not there yet. Still, 1% to 2% of our workforce gets injured to some degree each year. The only acceptable number is 0%. In terms of some of that science, I've been here before and presented in detail our watershed management, some of our species at risk planning, and I'll continue to do that, and my staff will do that at the various committees and working groups of this great watershed and regional district. A new one for us in specific detail is carbon. So you can see here, we all understand that trees need light, water, dirt. They also need air, and in that air is carbon dioxide, which they convert into the beautiful renewable structures that we see. So they absorb greenhouse gases. We emit a small amount of greenhouse gases in the management of those resources. Half of our resources end up in long-lived wood products like those here today. That means that over time, as we harvest and reforest, on managed forest, it is a very carbon-friendly cycle. And in fact, we're confident that in the near future, we'll be close to a carbon neutral and ultimately a carbon sink. Timber West pursued that to the level of a certification in 2018 from the Carbon Trust to confirm that we know our organizational carbon footprint all the way through our supply chain, and we were the first forest company to do that in 2018. What we'll be doing is extending that across Mosaic land base, which includes Island Timberlands, and make that consistent. Also, what we'll be making consistent across Mosaic, which is Timber West and Island Timberlands, is how we collaborate with our communities, our local governments, our First Nations, and other stakeholders An example of that was in 2017 when we achieved what's known as Progressive Aboriginal Relations Certification. This is a first for a BC Forest Company. It was Timber West at the time. We're going to extend that to Mosaic and all of Island Timberlands operations as well, where we are audited regularly by third parties and commit to various levels of employment, investment, and participation with our First Nation partners in whose territories we operate. To wrap it all up, an example of some of the things we're doing in 2019 includes our First Nations commitments. We'll be continuing to support them entering the forestry economy more so than they already are. We want to expedite that, $200,000 in First Nations scholarships. We're going to be continuing to reduce our carbon footprint wherever we can, reducing slash pile burning, expanding our carbon commitment, of course, to Island Timberlands, increase funding for a variety of research, including the Marmot Recovery Foundation. And I know, importantly to this regional district, we will be deploying specifically new regional approaches to public access for recreation on private land. And one of the starting points that we're working with right now, including Community Futures and your staff, Amy Melmock, is an agreement with the Lake Cowichan Trailblazers to formalize rules and safety procedures for building trails and maintaining trails across the regional district, as just one example. So thank you for this. I look forward to continuing our relationship with the Cowichan Valley Regional District.
Domenico, are you prepared to take a few questions from the board?
Of course, Mr. Chair.
Excellent. Well, before we start, Evan said that we have to be nice to Domenico, so he gave us the input, we better. Does any of the board have questions for Mr. Yanni DiNardo? Director McGonigal.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair, thank you for your presentation. It's interesting to see two of the largest private landowners in British Columbia, or perhaps even Canada, amalgamating as one company. I'd be interested to note the logistics of your operations moving forward on fiber, where it can be directed, for instance. You spoke of reductions in GHGs, and with the conglomerate of dryland sorts throughout the area, whether the focus will be directing those fibers to the closest operations, or if you could speak to that, I'd appreciate it.
So one of the efficiencies, certainly, of coordinating the operations of Island Timberlands and Timber West are some of those logistical decisions, making sure we don't have trucks passing each other on highways to go to what is the less optimal sort. So we will have some greenhouse gas reduction simply in the reduction of unnecessary travel distances with our log trucks, for instance, and also our other vehicles. In terms of fiber allocation, we're working with Cowichan First Nations, we're working with Paper Excellence, and certainly harvesting very, very high utilization standards and making sure as much fiber as possible and ecologically beneficial is delivered to local sawmills and pulp mills.
Just to follow up, if I may. And I think an interesting comment was perhaps the reduction of slash burning, or I'll call it brush pile burning, with the convective nature of the Cowichan Valley, which holds that smoke in. I think that's an exciting avenue to explore other options within the removal of that debris.
Director Acton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon, Domenico. Nice to see you. I think your new management structure is quite interesting and quite commemorable. And in respect to your mom, if I have 3 boys, I would have taken a photo too. It's a proud moment, I'm sure. But yeah. And thank you for all your support in Shawnigan and
Sure.
your recent support with our bike race that's coming up, the Fondue Gravel Bike Race. But I saw on your list of initiatives, campground. Can you expand on that a little bit? Do you guys manage and run campgrounds, or what's the extent of that?
Domenico.
Yes, certainly. We have 10 at the moment across southern Vancouver Island on our private timberlands, for which the public can register on our campsite and pay $15 to $20 a night, I believe. We will be adding one to the Port Alberni area as part of the Mosaic affiliation this year. There are, I think, 3 technically in the Cowichan Valley Regional District, Lake Cowichan and Kissinger Lake.
Been interesting to look at.
Okay.
Director Kuhn.
Yes, Domenico, have you received the geotech report from, did we send that to Timber West? So you've
Yes.
seen it. Can you comment on that?
So yeah, on Friday there was a release publicly of the debris flow study that included the Yubo hillside. Timber West has reviewed that. We've sent some comments into staff. It is very important that safety remain paramount in all these considerations. A desktop study such as the one delivered recently is very important. Mosaic continues to stand by its commitment and is, as we speak, continuing to do more detailed terrain stability analysis on that part of the world behind Yubo, and we're committed to sharing that with the regional district and the community before we do any harvesting, and working with authorities to determine what is a safe path forward.
Director Nicholson.
Thanks, Domenico. I'm hoping you can help me.
Okay.
You know that in the Cook Silo watershed, we're experiencing significant drought conditions. And I think we're moving into maybe the 4th year of people with water licenses getting letters about reducing their use and so forth. And I am wondering what I should say to farmers when they say to me, yes, but what is happening? What are the forest companies doing to help with this situation?
So the answer I do give to farmers, and I'll repeat here, we believe, and I hope we all believe, that forestry as a renewable resource is part of the bigger global solution to what is a climate change reality for which the Coke Sila is certainly experiencing. Forests in the long run will retain more carbon out of the atmosphere. Management of our watersheds and our streamside areas are all important. Certainly, a working forest helps stabilize streams. Managing roads properly is all critical. We are, as a company, committed, and we're leading the way globally in understanding our carbon footprint, promoting forestry as a substitute for steel and concrete wherever possible, and making sure that whatever we do is contributing to the goal of appreciating forests as a carbon-friendly resource. So we have more people on this planet wanting a higher standard of living. How are we going to do that in a carbon-friendly way? We believe it requires good forestry, and we're very much aware of it and monitoring it and making sure our plans reflect it.
Director Marsh.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, what is your turnover? Is it 60 years and then you cut again, or?
So our rotation age varies depending on site. However, we do have harvest ages ranging from 40 to 80 years, generally.
Can you speak a little bit about the advantages of having a longer rotation in terms of the understory and the carbon sink?
So it's a complicated trade-off between longer rotations and carbon benefit. We have a very productive piece of forest here on southern Vancouver Island compared to the rest of Canada. So our trees grow relatively faster than anywhere else in Canada. So the rotations are shorter. There are ecological decisions and trade-offs. Nature notices forestry. What we do is when we plan out our harvests over multiple rotations, we account for old forest management areas, we account for riparian reserves, we account for safety and visual quality reserves. Those things are what we consider as contributing to the long-term persistence and support of critical species that require those types of structures. Now, other species require and prefer smaller, younger stand structures, and what we do is work to balance that across a big landscape. And as Mosaic, we have an opportunity to make a real cohesive, contiguous forest management plan like we couldn't quite do before. And so we're excited about that. A lot of people are working on that right now at Mosaic.
Can I have one follow-up?
Final follow-up, yep.
So I'm interested, you, in your bullet on sustainability and that you're using science-based practices, which I'm sure you always have.
Yes.
But is the science, how predictive is it in light of the changing weather? Like, how are you moving?
Okay.
I don't know how to
Well,
ask the question.
I'll give you a few examples of how we've adjusted our plans and planning processes over time as for instance, storm intensities have increased since World War II. It's just the quiescent period's over, and so our bridges are bigger and our culverts are bigger. Our ditches are bigger. We deactivate roads differently than we might have previously. On the reforestation and regenerative side, we're much more sensitive to the potential drought conditions that tree will experience in its first 5 years now when we're assigning what species should be planted to a particular area. And finally, on that front, we have a tree seed orchard at Saanich where we grow the seeds that we need to produce the 10 or 12 million seedlings that we plant each year. And we're part of the government cooperative that is endlessly studying and testing various families within species that are more drought resistant or more cold resistant, and keeping those in our long-term supply plans to make sure we have well-adapted trees for the future.
Thank you.
Director Salmon.
Thank you. Just, I think your slide on the carbon generally, did you say, so you're aiming at becoming a carbon sink, and right now you're still emitting carbon, and just maybe say how you're going to achieve that?
So we have been modeling since our previous rotation. So we've modeled 50 years back, knowing pretty much exactly what we've harvested, and using Canadian Forest Service models, assessed what types of products came out of those and where they were. Were they long-lived? What was their lifespan? We modeled that out to today, and we can also model out what we plan to produce over the next 2 rotations. We can also model what type of substitutions we can accommodate. So we can accommodate a certain amount of substitution for concrete and steel over time. We can also displace fossil fuels in heating various institutions or facilities. As we adjust our carbon footprint for Mosaic, we'll have a better sense of where our emissions balance is. But at the moment, on the scale of the billion tons of carbon that we have on our inventory on our land base in the form of trees today, our emissions from tailpipes are a fraction of a % of that. And where we're at this line between carbon positive, neutral, or negative is a matter of less than 1 rotation of trees. So we'll be continuing to model that and hopefully be able to update folks as we progress.
So I see no other hands. I just want to make a brief comment. I was able to speak with your president at the trail opening at Chemainus just a couple of weeks ago, and was able to speak to him briefly about the new branding and the likes. And both Island Timberlands and Timber West have had history in our communities for a lot of years. And one of the things that I think is really important is how Mosaic appears to be stepping forward and working with communities. And we have an item on our agenda later on today that's important, but there's items that couldn't happen. There's initiatives that couldn't happen without the cooperation of companies like yours and yours in particular. And I thank you for that and wish you for the best of luck with Mosaic moving forward. And thank you for coming and presenting to us and to the people in the audience today.
My pleasure. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, yeah. And now delegation number 2, I'd like to welcome forward Cindy Lise and Dr. Shannon Waters in regards to regional smoking bylaw project overview. Welcome.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and Directors. My name is Cindy Lise, and I'm the Regional Facilitator for Our Cowichan, which is the community's health network.
And Iasquail, good day. My name is Shannon Waters. I am the Medical Health Officer who is working with the Cowichan Valley region. This is
So many of you are familiar with the Cowichan Regional Airshed Roundtable that brings together multiple partners to address reducing the amount of air pollution and the impacts of PM 2.5 on our health. Air pollution is not our only challenge, and our health is also significantly impacted by smoking, e-cigarettes, and cannabis. In 2016, Our Cowichan traveled across the region and made presentations to local governments regarding smoking and our desire to work with them to explore ways to address the impacts. In early 2017, a task force was established that was made up of representatives from Our Cowichan, local governments, Island Health, and BC Lung Association. We looked at best practices, policy development, and the beginnings of a cessation strategy for our region. A draft bylaw was developed and returned to the communities for consideration. It was deemed that working via the CVRD to establish one regional bylaw would be our most effective approach. And at that time, the bylaw was presented to the CVRD, but due to other pressing responsibilities, staff changes, and an upcoming election, the project was put on hold, and we're returning to you today to reignite our efforts that we started in 2017. So we know of the consequences of smoking, but smoking continues to rise and thrive in our community. Actually, this is a wrong slide here. Can I go back one? Oh, sorry. I'll let Shannon do that. We're just out of order here. Okay, I'm going to do this the other way. We'll move. So when smoking, a typical smoker takes 10 puffs on a cigarette. A pack-a-day smoker thus typically has over 200 hits of nicotine a day. Tobacco smoke contains an estimated 4,000 compounds with about 250 chemicals that are known to be carcinogenic, including tar, carbon monoxide, formaldehyde, hydrogen cyanide, and benzene. In addition to the impacts from an individual for smoking, we cannot forget that secondhand smoke is equally as toxic.
So since the original look at the bylaw occurred, we've had a number of things that have changed within the Canadian context and here in BC. So two I want to mention today, in particular here, are vaping products. So these have been legal in Canada since May of 2018, so just a year now. And these were introduced into the market with no regulatory measures regarding selling or use of vaping products. So some of the things that are unique and different with regards to smoking is that there's unregulated nicotine levels and specific technology targeted by the marketers to allow nicotine to be a quicker hit at a higher level. And also very concerning is that there's flavoring products which have not been studied or regulated either that are added to a lot of vaping products. Because of what is happening with the nicotine, the addictive potential is far greater than that of smoking. And with the flavoring in particular, things such as cotton candy, tutti frutti, and things of that nature, it's really targeting to youth. And we're quickly finding that this is often to smoking as well. Teens, our youth, are at the highest risk due to their developing brains, and nicotine dependence in adolescence is emerging. We don't even really have the supports right now or the expertise to really know how to deal at the levels that we've seen nicotine dependence in adolescents that we've noticed in the last while. We have evidence of longer term effects, but because these have been around for such a short time, it'll take a bit of a longer time for those longer term effects to emerge. So this is just a diagram here of some of the products that are out there. In the top right-hand corner is something called Juul. I don't know if many of you are familiar with this. If you go to any of our high schools, you will see many of these around. So it's basically the size of kind of like a USB stick that you might plug into your computer. You can kind of just hide it in your hand and suck on it to get the nicotine, and you can emit the vapor, and very little visible vapor and very little odor. Juul was initially not available in Canada, and now it is, and it has just really affected especially our teen vaping rates.
Cannabis is now legal. We have close to 16% of all Canadians reported using cannabis, and this equates to 4.6 million people aged 15 or older as of November 2018. In our initial planning for the smoking bylaw, we had hoped to include cannabis as legalization was pending, and now in 2019, it's here. Cannabis smoke contains the same harmful chemicals found in tobacco smoke. Some of the long-term effects of smoking cannabis on the body are similar to the effects of smoking tobacco and can include risks to lung health, including bronchitis, lung infections, chronic long-term cough, and increased mucus buildup in the throat. And again, teens are at the highest risk due to their developing brains, which is the same for nicotine and vaping products.
So I started in this role as a medical health officer for the Cowichan Valley region in 2017, but some of the good work that our Cowichan Health Network has done over time included a health profile that was created in 2014. And within that health profile, there was a number of things that highlighted where we're at as a community with regards to smoking, which prompted some of the look in looking at a comprehensive smoking bylaw in the first place. So here's just a bit of a snapshot of how we've been doing since that 2014 health profile. And you can see with regards to current smoking, we're below the BC rate, but some particular high-risk populations, including women who are smoking in pregnancy, we are higher than Island Health and BC as a whole, especially in the Lake Cowichan area. When we look at something like potential years of life lost from lung or tracheal cancer, we are higher in Lake Cowichan and Ladysmith compared to Island Health. When we look at tobacco-related hospitalizations per year, again, we're higher. And when we look at potential years of life lost from respiratory disease, we have some concerns with being higher in the Ladysmith area. And also, another thing we look at is a standardized mortality ratio for chronic lung disease and smoking-related deaths, and we have some concerning numbers there as well. But what I also just want to really bring everyone's attention to is a survey of our youth that was actually just released in the last couple of months. This is a survey that's done at schools across the province. It's called the McCreary Center Society Survey. Many of you may have heard of it. And there was some specific questions in there in the last round that looked particularly at smoking and vaping. And what I really want to draw your attention to on the bottom graph there is youth who have used a vape pen or stick, those are actually even old terms now because this is changing so quickly, in the past month amongst all youth. And here on Island Health, we had a quarter of youth in the past month reported using a vape stick or pen with nicotine in the previous month. I do want to let you know that we've been working with the school districts across Island Health to get specific survey results for our school district. And this data we are just beginning to share with the school district. Our school district, including all the ones across Vancouver Island, have reached out to Island Health to help look at this issue. And what I can say, we're still talking with the data amongst ourselves, but what I can say is our rate here in school district 79 is higher than any of what you see here on this graph. So we have a real issue here in this valley.
So initially, what started this project was the data. And what we did is we explored what policies existed across the region. And so what we learned was that in 2017, or as of 2017, the only local government with a comprehensive smoking bylaw was the City of Duncan. Ladysmith, Lake Cowichan, and the municipality had no smoking bylaws at that time. The CVRD had components of bylaws in different places. Of the bylaws that did exist, the language was not the same across them. And all of our communities were following the provincial legislation, but unfortunately, there's no mechanism to react in the sense of a report coming in. And it's not able to be enforced locally. As a result of our efforts, the town of Ladysmith adopted a bylaw based on the draft that we created. So, working with our task force, we reviewed multiple bylaws and best practices in an effort to draft one of the province's most comprehensive regional bylaws. And so we would like our bylaw to be of best practice. And when we say burn, we mean anything that produces smoke, vapor, or substances that can be inhaled, and that would now include vaping products and cannabis in its language. That we use best practices that increase the distance from doors and windows to at least 7 meters, or within 7 meters, and that we include all parks and beaches in our efforts. And it should be noted that other jurisdictions are aware of what we've started here in Cowichan, and we have folks checking in to see how we're doing, because there are others who will intend to follow suit. So we're being observed in our efforts.
So what we're here today asking you to consider is that the CVRD review and move to adopt the draft bylaw that was submitted in 2017 so that our region can have one comprehensive bylaw that crosses all jurisdictions. I mean, I just also want to say, like, with what's happened since 2017, some people may sometimes kind of feel ho-hum about smoking and its effects, but we now have rising, mounting evidence, especially here in our valley, that vaping products, which have been bought by big tobacco and are searching for new customers in our youth, is a big reason why we need to push to have one comprehensive bylaw. Our schools are really feeling this pressure, and we know that our youth go from schools to the rest of the community, and that our community is very fluid in terms of which, municipality or town that you might be in. We also ask that there be a consideration of something that was put forward to the municipalities from Island Health before cannabis was legalized, and that's consideration of buffer zones of at least 300 meters be established around schools for cannabis and vaping products, and any retail within proximity of schools should be referred to school districts for consultation. And while a bylaw would help strengthen how we're responding to this as a community, it certainly doesn't stand alone in our initiative to try and reduce smoking and vaping and its effects on our health. Our Cowichan, Island Health, and the BC Lung Association will continue to work together to increase awareness of the impact of smoking and vaping, and look at developing cessational and educational programming. I've already had a couple of meetings with School District 79 and looking at how we can work together to address this significant spike that they're seeing in teen vaping. And we want to continue to collaborate with local government to draw attention to the bylaw as another means of education and awareness. So I think in setting this construct, something comprehensive across the region, we can, show that this is an important issue, that we can have an impact at this level while we're doing the other work to try and bring this, this issue and its many recent developments into, the best for all of our health.
Excellent. Are you prepared to take a couple of questions? Well, I've got Director Stone, Sebring, and I'll add the next two to the list. Director Stone.
Thank you. And I appreciate the push that you've been giving us, and that we adopted those in Ladysmith. Just for clarity, I think that a lot of communities do have smatterings of smoking regulations and different bylaws, but bringing it together in one, I think, is really important. Something that's really thrown me off is that, you know, a couple of years, well, it might be several years ago now, but years ago, there was a move to ban things like flavored cigars, and I believe that was federal legislation actually that pushed that agenda item forward. Yet you have vapes coming out now that have nicotine and whatever else in them that are more, I guess, effective at inducing youth to using them. I just can't understand if there's where senior government is on this, where they regulate tobacco products, eliminating flavoring because they say it appeals to children, and yet vaping products with nicotine in them are way more obviously geared towards youth.
Yeah, so I think a lot of us in public health would feel that, you know, federally, this wasn't approached in the most great manner. Currently, right now, there is a consultation that Health Canada is doing looking at reducing youth access and appeal of vaping products and what potential regulatory measures could be put in place. Unfortunately, a lot of this had been brought forward before things like Juul and vaping products in general hit the market, especially with some of the concerns around flavoring, because really there are some benefits to vaping products for adults who are chronic smokers who have tried many other ways to quit, and a vaping product is a harm reduction measure for them. Those are not the people who are looking for flavored
Bubblegum,
products.
no.
They prefer tobacco-flavored products, which are not big with the youth, as you can imagine. And so some of the big pushes we're going for, and Island Health and the medical health officers are putting in a specific, lengthy letter to this consultation is, no marketing to youth and getting rid of flavors. There's really, but how successful that will be will take some time to figure out. And unfortunately, we've learned so much from tobacco coming onto the market, but essentially people are looking at, they want to accumulate the data in the same way, which could be 10 to 15 years before we really see what the effects of this are. So whatever we can do to help protect our youth, especially in the meantime, I think would be more effective than what we're going to see federally.
Thank you.
And if I may, so e-cigarettes containing nicotine were not legal in Canada until the passing of Bill S5 in May of 2018. So our government's actually agreed in May of 2018 that nicotine could be brought into Canada. And so there is no established regulatory framework in regards to e-cigarettes. And you may have heard on the news, I think it was in the last couple of days, that SkyTrain has these giant billboards promoting vaping products, and there's a lot of backlash. And so the report that came through said there's nothing legally that can prevent the tobacco companies from promoting their products, because it's not been established as of yet.
Thank you. I just wanted to highlight the sort of lack of common sense that they go through a lengthy process to ban flavored cigars, which, for any of those who may have tried one in a moment of weakness, don't taste good. They don't taste like grape, I swear. But when it comes to these vaping products that do just taste like candy or whatever it is, that those nicotine-based products are allowed to be there. And frankly, I don't think they appeal to adults at all. I don't know a lot of adults, like you say, that are looking for bubblegum or Jolly Rancher flavored vapes. They're only appealing to kids. It's frustrating to say that we're going to be creating a problem before we go, oh no, now we have to solve it.
Thank you, Director Stone. Director Sebring.
I used to like old port cigarillos. They did taste good, but never mind. A couple of things. On the part of what you're asking for is the restriction on the sale and I gather use of cannabis products within 300 meters of schools. In the North Cowichan context, we've set that parameter at 600 meters, and we're getting some pushback on that. The concern that jumps to mind for me with a bylaw like this, particularly in an area as geographically large and diverse as the Cowichan Valley Regional District, is enforceability. Within the North Cowichan context, you're right, we do not have a specific bylaw, but we have educational signs in our parks, and we're asking people not to smoke, and it's an educational piece. We chose deliberately not to attach the enforcement piece to it, Because frankly, by the time somebody calls it in and the bylaw enforcement officer gets there, the cigarette butt's long gone and usually the smoker is long gone. So it didn't make practical sense. It makes practical sense within the boundaries of 1 square mile of the city of Duncan, and Ladysmith is not that much bigger, and the bylaw people can get there in a hurry. But if you've got somebody violating this bylaw halfway between here and Yubo, and somebody complains, really? I mean, we need to be realistic in terms of what we can enforce. I'm all about the education piece. I'm all about putting the signs up in the parks, please don't smoke. That's different from threatening them with sanctions that we are not in a position to impose. I'd just caution you that as this discussion gets going, if it does, that'll be the position that I'm taking unless I can be convinced otherwise. Thank you.
Before I go to the next person on the list, just to let you know, I've already spoken with Mr. Anderson about what we currently have on the books, and I'll be turning to Mr. Carruthers at the end of our comments for a bit of a wrap-up. This is a multi-jurisdictional, multifaceted issue that I think we want to proceed with, but just wanted everyone to know that there's been a couple of steps that have already been undertaken when we had this presentation come forward to us. Director Yanni DiNardo.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think you've already answered my question, because I was looking for direction and next steps, so we're going to hear that. Are we not? Thank you.
Director Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm an ex-smoker from the age of 14 up until about 20 years ago. So, the reason I started, and this is the same as what you're talking about here, is that kids think it's cool. It's peer pressure every time, you know, because the cool kids over there do it. And I'm on the side of Director Sebring here. I'm not sure how you would enforce that in a wide area, and I would be more in favor of education and prevention rather than enforcement, because that to me is the only way to do it. Make it uncool.
Shannon?
Yeah, what I'll just comment to that is that, I mean, from a public health approach, often we want to take many different angles. So one of the things we talk about is the many E's, education being one of those angles, enforcement being another angle, engineering being another angle, like can we, you know, do things with the product that make it less addictive or less harmful. So yeah, I agree that education is extremely important, but I also think that, you know, having something comprehensive across the region, which, you know, makes a clear statement with regards to, you know, approaching this in a serious way because of the seriousness of the issue, I think is another important stream to take a look at.
And if I may, when we went through this round one, we had the same question come forward. So say, for example, you're out at Whippletree Junction and you work in a shop, and every single day there's a staff person who smokes outside your business. Those are the cases where we actually may have an opportunity to respond. We know that somebody who lights up a cigarette in a park walking, you know, is not necessarily a place where we can respond. But where we can have an impact is in situations where there's chronic challenges that occur over and over, perhaps in a housing complex, in a local business downtown, or in our community somewhere. And so that's why the regional approach as well.
Director McGonigal.
Good afternoon. My name's Tim, and I'm a smoker. Wrong meeting, but I was glad to be involved with the task force on bringing forward a regional approach, and enforceability was one of the major topics that was broached by the group. And as a smoker, I am a respectful consumer of nicotine, non-flavored bubblegum. I will chew, not smoke. And what was thought of was something similar to water restriction bylaws, which are uniform across the region, on enforceability where enforceability can be done, education where education will help, and public knowledge as to the health effects of 2.5 ppm, 2.5. So it wasn't an easy concept to get to the end of this discussion. There was much wordsmithing, many workshops, hours of input by the BC Lung Association, the health officer, and all parties at the table. So it wasn't an ill-conceived thought process that it was not enforceable, but where it could be enforced and educate, and cessation brought forward as possibilities by the BC Lung Association as well, that maybe one day I will be a non-smoker.
Thank you, Director McGonigal. Director Coon.
It seems to me that I talk to my grandchildren, and they're that age now where they've tried it, and luckily I don't think they'll continue with it. But the feedback I got from them is it seems that vaping is less of a hurdle than cigarettes used to be, because there's no burning involved, and because it's not that smoke, it's a vapor. And I don't think many of them understand that there's actually nicotine, there's this and this and this in there. It's got this kind of perfume smell, which kind of makes it look like it's, oh, well, it's just, you're just breathing a bit of steam there. But I think many of the kids don't even know what's in there. And I think that's what actually makes it more dangerous, because with cigarettes, you knew, even when I was young, and I used to smoke when I was young, we knew it wasn't good. But with these things now, that's not out there. It's almost like, well, it's just, oh, this is like cherry or whatever, and there's no thought about how dangerous it is. So that message has to get out. That's what I think it would be important.
Director Marsh.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I think that Director McGonigal covered most of what I was going to say. I participated as well on the task force, and we did go over a lot of this for many, many hours, and used the best advice, of the professionals, the public health people. And I liken it to when seatbelts became a law. It took about a decade, I'm told, before people just generally wore their seatbelts. And it was, you could say that it's a similar type of enforcement thing, unless you happen to be pulled over by an officer, or an officer of the law drove by you and noticed you didn't have the strap. Well, in the beginning you didn't have straps, they just were down here. You know, you were still driving maybe without your seatbelt. So it's just kind of like one prong of many to get out the word to where we all learn differently. And I think that it really makes sense to have a uniform policy around the district. But I do seem to remember, and I'm looking at Mr. Carruthers now, that even if the CVRD board does make a bylaw, that doesn't automatically mean that it covers municipal areas. So very great well-meaning, and I think you remember that, right, Cindy? So like Ladysmith, Duncan has theirs. I don't know about Lake Cowichan. Lake Cowichan and North Cowichan would have to adopt it, and I would hope that they would. But I think it's a stellar idea and an important message for the leadership of the community to take in cooperation with all of the Cowichan organizations and with our public health department.
Thank you, Director Marsh, and I think that's a great segue to Mr. Carruthers as to what we might be looking at in the near future.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate Cindy and Shannon's frustration. We've been talking about this for a couple of years now, and this matter was before the Regional Services Committee, I believe, on April 25th of 2018, so just over a year ago. Staff did a pretty thorough analysis and raised some of the various points that some of the directors have raised around jurisdiction and applicability of the bylaw enforceability. Staff came back with a recommendation, and I believe the resolution that the committee passed at the time was that we look at amending our existing bylaw. We have a bylaw 1672 that covers smoking in public places and public buildings, and apparently applies to the municipalities as well as the electoral areas, but I have some concerns with that. So the recommendation was that we amend that bylaw rather than appealing it and enacting a new bylaw. The challenge comes in being a regional district. We don't have region-wide regulatory bylaws per se. So for example, sprinkling regulations came up. We have uniformity, and so we align and attempt to align our regional district. And when I say regional district, I'm saying electoral area, because that is the only service that we have for bylaw enforcement. We don't have a regional bylaw enforcement service. Only the electoral area directors pay for bylaw enforcement. Bylaw enforcement in municipalities is paid for and done by the municipalities. So there's a challenge in itself in that we don't go onto municipal lands and enforce bylaws, because they only apply generally to electoral areas. So the same goes for burning bylaws. We have burning bylaws in our electoral areas, and we have worked through the airshed groups to try and have uniformity across the region, but we don't have an overarching burning bylaw for the entire region because of the jurisdictional issue. So partly the reason that this really hasn't gone anywhere in the last year, first and foremost, capacity. We just have had a turnover of staff. The soils bylaw pretty much consumed all of our capacity in terms of developing new bylaws over the past year. But the other issue was the complicating factor of this bylaw. I think staff were struggling with it and how it would apply. What I would suggest is that the best course of action, in keeping with the intent of what you're trying to accomplish, is that we try to achieve uniformity amongst the 4 municipalities and the electoral areas in their bylaws, so that they're consistent and they're the same, but each jurisdiction enforces its own bylaws. It would be very difficult, I'll be frank, for the regional district, the CVRD, to try to enforce a regional bylaw on municipal lands. It would be incredibly difficult. By doing that, the schools and establishments in rural areas would fall under the CVRD bylaw. The schools and businesses in the municipalities would fall under the municipal bylaw, but we strive for uniformity, so all, essentially 5 bylaws would be the same, as we try to do with sprinkling, as we try to do with burning. I think that would be the best approach, because this has been a real challenge to try and get our heads around a regional regulatory bylaw, given the jurisdictional issue. And that's the first thing with the bylaw when it comes to enforcement. And even though we may say we may not enforce it, at the end of the day, there's no sense in enacting a bylaw that isn't enforceable. The first thing you have to prove in court is jurisdiction. And we would have a tough time proving jurisdiction within a municipality per se with that kind of bylaw. So all that to say that I think the work that you're doing is really important. I think we've kind of come up against a little bit of a roadblock in terms of how we actually make this work on the ground. I'm not suggesting we have a whole bunch of extra capacity these days right now, but what I will commit to doing is sitting down with our bylaw staff, following the direction that we get from the board today, and revisiting this and saying, what can we do? What's the best way to get this moving forward? Because I would hate to be here another year from now and have you guys standing at the podium and we're still not made any progress with it. So.
We'll go to Director McGonigal, and then I've got a couple of comments to wrap up.
Thank you, and
Director
I think that was the intent of the working group, was to move this forward and then piggyback the municipalities to also incorporate the similar bylaw. I think this may be a subject for the administrators of all the areas in one of their future meetings to broach. If it is passed regionally, I know Ladysmith has adopted this one. It would be North Cowichan. Duncan has a fairly strong one. I don't know if it aligns with this totally, but quite close. Then that would leave Lake Cowichan, which you can see by the health numbers is quite a large contributor to some of the health issues within that.
That's mostly you. Oh, sorry.
But there's another L community there too, which has adopted that bylaw, and I thank them for that. But that may be an avenue to broach, similar to what we did with the water restrictions.
Director Staples.
Yeah, I was just going to add, Duncan updated our bylaw in 2018, and it's about 95%. We're 6 meters instead of 7, but I believe the rest of it is consistent with.
Thank you for that, and I know timing can be everything in local government, and I recall a conversation a year and a half ago at Cowichan Lake Recreation where we had an incident where someone was imbibing in cannabis within the distance of a entrance to a community hall, and police were called, and he pulled out his medicinal cannabis certificate, and it wasn't tobacco, and he had a license, and there really wasn't a whole bunch that can be done. But now that we've got the consistency in the federal regulations, I think that it's time that we address this and move forward. So I thank you very much for this and for coming today, and appreciate you coming, and come again soon. Thank you. No correspondence. Ms. Harrison?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The next item on the agenda is report of the chair.
Thank you. I'll be very brief. I just wanted to touch on a couple of things, and I'll be turning to Director Yanni DiNardo in a moment. I just wanted to report that a number of you have taken time out of your busy schedules to come and meet with me to check in. It's been 6 months since you selected me to be the chair of this organization, and I very much appreciate the input and advice and suggestions. And just as an example, when the clock ran over 10 minutes in our last delegation, I got a little antsy, but they wrapped up fairly shortly after, so I'll try and be a little more freewheeling in my chairing up here, and appreciate what was shared with me, and I hope that I was able to contribute to some of you as well. Secondly, I just wanted to give a very quick explanation for those in the audience and those at home that when we're voting around this table on most items, there's 15 votes, and that everyone is required to vote. We usually count those that are cast in the negative, and those are recorded. So if you happen to see someone not putting up their hand, it is recorded as an affirmative vote. So you may not see all the hands add up, but we do count the negatives, and that's how we determine whether or not a motion is carried or not. Thirdly, I wanted to mention that on Friday, there was an amazing event that happened in downtown Duncan. Started over at Duncan City Hall. A number of directors and mayors were present. Our youth got active, and they came out, and they had a climate action strike. And it was really impressive. I was able to walk with them and observe and listen to some of the speeches, and they actually did a little decorating out front of the building here, and put sticky notes all across the front of the building with messages of concern for what they're concerned about. And it was a really great event, and a lot of us were there to listen to what they have to say, and we have a very motivated and active youth in this valley, and it was a real pleasure to be able to engage and watch and listen to them. And with that, I'll go to you I'll go to Director Marsh really quickly, and then I want to go to Director Yanni DiNardo. Director Marsh?
I just wondered, Mr. Chair, if you could tell the board and the gallery what shape those sticky notes were in.
They were in lovely heart shapes. It was wonderful. And with that, I'd like to go to RC1, a Canadian Institute of Planners Annual Award for Planning Excellence, re the Cowichan Bay Charrette, and I will turn it over to Director Yanni DiNardo.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I know most of you do know that we had held this charrette over 3 days in Cowichan Bay, and I'd like to congratulate CVRD because we've won an award for planning excellence. So this is from the Canadian Institute of Canada. So this is a rural small town planning award. One of the consultants there's many consultants, but one was Fraser Simpson Consulting. And the award will be handed out in Ottawa. I believe we do have a planner that will be accepting the award on our behalf. And this is a charrette that was done in the village of Cowichan Bay. And really, this is a jewel of British Columbia that just isn't for Cowichan Bay. Cowichan Bay, the village itself, it was a charrette specifically for the village. And we wanted to recognize where it would go in the future. We also wanted to protect it. We all know if anything would happen to the village of Cowichan Bay, it could not be rebuilt where it is. So I'd like to thank the staff for their forward thinking and our community for participating in this process and continued process. This isn't a one-time, this continues to go on. And we have been doing many small steps since we've had this charrette. And June 27th, we'll be having a community conversation on some of the next steps at the Maritime Center from 7 to 9. So I thank you for the opportunity and congratulate CVRD.
Excellent. Thank you, Director Yanni DiNardo. And thank you, Director Acton, for leading the clapping. Ms. Harrison.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The next item on the agenda, is information. There is none. Following that is committee reports. The first committee report that we have on the agenda is the report and recommendations of the Island Savings Center Commission meeting of May 9th, 2019.
Director Sebring, and then we'll take a short break after we've dealt with CR1.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. The Island Savings Center Commission met on May 9th and made 3 recommendations. I'm prepared to move 2 of them, and the third we can leave for some discussion. And I think we should take them one at a time because they're somewhat unrelated. So to begin with, I will move recommendation 1, that the name of the Island Savings Center be changed to the Cowichan Community Center.
Seconded by Director Stone.
Can I speak to the motion?
You can speak to the motion, Director Sebring.
Thank you very much. I wasn't here at the meeting where this was sent back to the commission for further discussion. You need to know as a board, and perhaps you don't, that the commission did extensive research late last year, put out a request for interest to see if there was anybody else who might want to sponsor or do a naming thing like we did with Island Savings. We had no interest. There was a lot of discussion around the commission table about the process that led to that naming in the first place, 10, almost 11 years ago now. There was a lot of community angst at the time because it was done in secret. And these kind of deals, as we all know around this table, generally are negotiated at in-camera meetings because that's how you do these negotiations. But that was one of the concerns that was raised at the commission, was we didn't want to go through that again. And the second concern generally was that even though this 10-year deal at $100,000 a year did give us $1 million worth of capital funding for the facility, that at the end of the day, probably we weren't prepared to get into that again, at least not in a primary naming sense. There's still some appetite, and it may come up at some point that it's the Cowichan Community Center, TELUS wing or something like that, that there, there'd be minor sponsorships possibly scattered throughout the building. That hasn't been ruled out, but the naming centrally of the facility, the recommendation is that it go back to Cowichan Community Center. When the board referred this back to the commission at its meeting a month or so ago, we looked at it again and said, we affirm again the recommendation that we made back in February or whenever it was, and the board needs to understand that right now the signage still says Island Savings Center, and they have been getting, because the deal expired at the end of October, I believe, they've been getting essentially 8 months worth of free advertising out of this while we sit and dilly-dally and figure out what we're going to do. And there were some folks at the commission who expressed a very strong opinion that said, you know what, it's time to stop giving them free advertising. Let's move this on. So I'm pleased to make the motion for the Cowichan Community Center.
Thank you, Director Sebring. Director Stone.
I was happy to second it. For those of you who may be aware, I was the one who made the motion to refer it back to the commission. And had Director Sebring been here, I don't think that motion either would have been made or gone through. I do really appreciate the perspective, and obviously the name Cowichan Community Center, although I'm the mayor of Ladysmith, I did spend a significant part of my life here in more Cowichan proper and in Cowichan Bay, and used the facility and fondly remember it as Cowichan Community Center myself. So to those of you who helped make that a reality for all of us as kids growing up, and to the other kids that used that facility through the years, I just want to make it absolutely clear that I'm super supportive of that. Without the perspective from the commission discussion, maybe the referral back to the commission was short-sighted, but here we are again, and we'll be able to move forward with it. And maybe at the same time, I mistakenly made some similar points around if we're going to be, rebranding it again, removing the Island Savings brand, make sure we get it right, and it's clear from the feedback from the community and all the work that the commission's done that the Cowichan Community Center name is definitely the right name. So I just wanted to say that I appreciate that, and I do apologize to those who may have been offended by my motion to refer it back to the commission.
And just, Mr. Chair, if I might, I apologize for not being here at that meeting. I was at Municipal Finance Authority, so you can't be two places at once.
Seeing no other hands, call the question. All those in favor? Are there any opposed? I see none opposed. The motion carries unanimously. Shall we take a short 5-minute?
Actually, there's two more
Oh, yeah,
recommendations
pardon me.
from
You're
Island
right.
Savings.
Sorry. Item 3?
Item 3, that a 3-year license of use agreement with the Cowichan Valley Arts Council beginning July 1st, 2019 at the Island Savings Center, now the Cowichan Community Center, for exclusive use of the Arbutus Gallery in the Massachi Room be approved. I'll move that.
Point of order, Mr. Chair. I've just been given the signal that it's actually 2-year, not 3-year. No? Sorry.
Moved by Director Sebring, seconded by Director Marsh. Director Yanni DiNardo.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. At that same meeting, we had a lot of discussion. I'll be in favor of moving this, but we had a lot of discussion on Arts Council and activism and lobbying that was happening in the community center itself. And we had a long discussion on that, and also about spaces, Area D, as well as we won that amazing award. We do not have any meeting spaces in our area, so that was part of the discussion. But they were happy overall to give this to the Arts Council because it really contributes to the community. I was one of the people that was really in favor. Arts and culture is really important. But we also had a very large discussion on that, and I think that we resolved that issue as well. So I just wanted to make sure that everyone had heard that. Thank you.
Well, I'd like to call the question, but our corporate secretary and our general manager just, oh, there she is. So are we sure it's 3-year?
It is 3 years.
Excellent. So everyone's clear on the question. Call the question. All those in favor? Are there any opposed? There's none opposed. Motion carries.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And bullet 2 is a recommendation from the commission that Cowichan tribes be invited to discuss criteria for the naming of community assets in the future. I'm not prepared to move that. I've had a discussion with staff and some of you, and this came from the commission, but when it gets to this board table, we're not just dealing with Cowichan tribes, we're dealing with a multitude of First Nations around the area. I don't think that this motion is appropriate as worded. I would just leave it on the table as information, and if the direction of the board is that the commission make a more all-encompassing recommendation, I can take that back to the commission, or we can leave it here for your information. At your pleasure, Mr. Chair.
Well, I don't see it moved. So we're done.
Thank you.
Take a short break. Back here at 3:05. Could I have directors return to the board table, please?
Thank you.
Okay, looks like we have quorum. Ms. Harrison?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The next item is item CR2, which is a report and recommendations of the Electoral Area Services Committee meeting of May 15th, 2019.
Director Yanni DiNardo.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Your Electoral Area Services Committee reports and recommends as follow, 1 through 8, that a grant and aid Electoral Area F, Cowichan Lake Scotts Falls, in the amount of $500 be awarded to Lake Cowichan Secondary for a bursary for graduating students residing in Electoral Area F, Cowichan Lake, South Scotts Falls. 2, grant and aid, it's going to seem repetitive, that a grant and aid Electoral Area F, Cowichan Lake, South Scotts Falls, in the amount of $6,000 be provided to the Kaikus Volunteer Fire Department to assist in the provision of services to the West Cowichan Lake area. 3, that a grant and aid for Electoral Area F, Cowichan Lake, South Scotts Falls, in the amount of $7,500 be provided to the Cowichan Lake District Chamber of Commerce to support the 2019 Cowichan Lake Visitors Business Center services. 4, that a grant and aid for Electoral Area F, Cowichan Lake, South Scotts Falls, in the amount of $1,235 be provided to the Cowichan Lake District Chamber of Commerce to support the sponsorship of the Visitors Center Mobile Service Unit through June 2021. 5, that a grant and aid Electoral Area F, Cowichan Lake, Scotts Falls, in the amount of $750 be provided to the Cowichan Lake and River Stewardship Society to support their 10th anniversary revisioning event this fall. 6, that a grant and aid Electoral Area F, Cowichan Lake, South Scotts Falls, in the amount of $1,250 be provided to the Honeymoon Bay Community Society to support the Society's hosting of the events in 2019, including Bay Days Car Show and Shine, $500, Pot Lick Dimmer, Christmas Craft Fair Canada Day, $750. Number 7, that a grant and aid Electoral Area F, Cowichan Lake, South Scotts Falls, in the amount of $1,250 be provided to the Honeymoon Bay Community Society to support the Society's carpet bowling tournament hosted at the Honeymoon Bay Hall. And 8, that the grant and aid Electoral Area F, Cowichan Lake, South Scotts Falls, in the amount of $1,500 be provided to the Vancouver Island Wind Sports Society to support the Windfest Nitnat Lake event on July 26th through to the 28th of 2019. I move those items.
Seconded by Director Wilson. Any discussion? Seeing none, call the question. All those in favor? Are there any opposed? None opposed. The motion carries.
Thank
Director
you,
Yanni
Mr. Chair.
DiNardo.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Moving on to Electoral Area Directors only vote. This is 9, 10. I'd like to poll number 10, please. And I will start with number 9. The Development Variance Permit Number DVP 18D26 be denied.
And there's a seconder by Director Acton. Any discussion on that one item? Seeing none, Electoral Area Directors, call the question. All those in favor? Are there any opposed? I see none opposed. That motion carries. Item 10.
Mr. Chair, I'm moving the number 10. I'd like to move this, but I'd also like to speak to it too. The Development Permit Variance Application Number DVP 19B01 1905 Wooden Road to vary Section 8.6 of the zoning bylaw 985 to reduce the exterior side parcel line setback for a residential use of 4.5 meters to 0 meters be approved, and that a covenant be registered on title outlining the approved variance.
Moving that item.
Yes.
Seconded by Director Acton. Director Yanni DiNardo.
Thank you. I understand through the building inspector that there cannot be a covenant registered on title on this piece of property. So I'm curious on what we're moving here, and so I wanted to clarify that. That's why I pulled it. I don't know if there's anybody else that wishes to speak to this.
Mr. Anderson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Yes, the intent was to put a notice on title so that any further or new person who may buy this is given notice, adequate notice that there is a variance that allowed this. Upon further research and because I've got 5 years of rust on my brain after being away, in actual fact, the development variance permit, there is a notice put on title automatically notifying any future purchasers of this variance. So there's really no need for a covenant. So that item number 2 should be pulled from that one.
Ms. Harrison, are we requiring a amendment motion to pull 2 from this since it's already been moved and seconded?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Actually, no. Director Yanni DiNardo read out the 10.1, but not 2. She said she wanted to speak to number 2, I believe. I don't think she read out the whole recommendation.
Did you read 1 and 2?
Did she?
I thought you
Did
read
she?
1 and 2.
Okay.
Yes.
So, thank you, Mr. Chair. So, yes, we would just, because it's beyond our jurisdiction, it wouldn't apply, so we'll just remove it.
So we'll just vote on 1. Is that what I'm hearing?
Number 2 shouldn't be in there.
Okay, so number
we'll
2
just
doesn't exist.
Disregard it, yeah.
Director Yanni DiNardo.
So automatically, there is a notice on title with this piece of property?
That's what
Then,
Mr.
so
Anderson
this-
is saying.
So number 2 does not have to be there. I'd also like to speak to how I really don't think I was from the beginning voting against this. I really feel that we are moving backwards with this, and we need to, I know we talked about staying out of the gray and black and white and whatever we went around and around electoral area services, but I feel that we have guidelines and rules, and this one is far reaching out of the jurisdiction that we have, and I just feel that I don't believe that we should be approving this.
Director Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We've talked, and this has gone backwards and forwards. The last vote was fairly unanimous, well, fairly in favour of approving this one. I don't think really that any more discussion is going to move us any further in any other direction.
Thank you. And Director Yanni DiNardo, your mic, please. And Director Smith.
Thank you to the chair. I know that we all feel emotionally attached to this file, and I would like to point out that the applicant earlier indicated at an earlier meeting that he had looked at some tape, the survey tape, and had measured from that tape. That to me was not the correct tape, and due diligence I feel was not done at that time. It's very important when you are building on land that is bare, that has no indication that's forest, you need to look very carefully to make sure you follow your survey, and where the survey tape is may not be your tape, it may be tape that belongs to another development or another area. So due diligence is very important, and our decision to allow a house that is now 0 meters from the property line only passes it along to the next purchaser. These people, this applicant may hold on to this property for a long time, but in the future it will end up in someone else's hands and it becomes an issue for them. I still believe that there is an option that the applicant can move the house to a different location that brings it into compliance with the zoning bylaws for this area. I will not support this as it is written at this time, or this recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Smith. Director Acton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I agree with Director Wilson. This has gone around several times, so I'm quite confident with calling the question. I've been to the property. The applicant has permission from MOTI. It's right beside a road right away. It really, the fact that we're still discussing this, I think we're all here to move the big rocks. This is a little rock. So I'm happy to ask you to call the question.
Seeing no other hands, electoral area directors only. Raise them high. All those in favor? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All those opposed? 2, 3. The motion carries.
That is my report, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Director Yanni DiNardo. Ms. Harrison.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The next item on the agenda is the report and recommendations of the Regional Services Committee meeting of May 21st, 2019.
Director Stone.
Your Regional Services Committee reports and recommends as follows. Number 1, that identified hazards in the 2018-2019 risk assessments as detailed in the Environmental Services Division's April 10th, 2019 staff report be integrated in the following documents currently in preparation. Number 1, modernized official community plans and related bylaws as natural hazards planning areas. Number 2, CVRD asset management plan as climate risk hazards. And 3, CVRD drinking water and watershed protection plans as key information. Number 1, that the purchase of a 4x4 pickup for Public Safety Division operations using unspent budget funds realized through the procurement of the budgeted Type 2 sprinkler protection unit be approved. Number 2, that short-term borrowing of up to $180,000 be approved for the purchase of a Type 2 sprinkler protection unit and 4x4 pickup truck to be paid back over 5 years as per the liabilities under Agreement Section 175 of the Community Charter. And finally, number 3, that a letter of support be sent to TELUS for the installation of a 50-meter self-support tower plus a lightning rod at 155 Pilkey Point Road on Thetis Island. And I move those items.
Do we have a seconder? We have a seconder. I gather there's people seconded by Director Marcotte. I've got Director Yanni DiNardo and Director Kuhn.
Actually, Mr.
Anyone
Chair, I
else?
wanted to separate number 1 out to vote on it separately.
Thank you. So we'll
would
deal
you
with
like to
number
do
1
that?
first. Mr. Chair?
Yeah, let's deal with number 1 first. Do you want to speak to it?
No, I just want to make sure, we had spoken to it earlier, and I just wanted to make sure that the voices could be heard, what could be seen, who's in favor and who's opposed.
So it's your intent that you want to see 1, 2, and 3 voted on separately?
Nope,
Just 1?
1.
All right. Director Kuhn, did you want to speak to number? Okay. Everyone's clear. We're going to call the question on item 1.
You mean item 1 and subsection 1, 2, and 3?
Correct. It's been read, moved and seconded. All those in favor? Are there any opposed? Keep your hands up. Yanni DiNardo, Wilson, Smith, Kuhn, and Sebring. The motion carries. Items 2 and 3. Do we need to move and second them again, or are we good? Well, let's do that. We have to do it again.
So moved.
Moved by Director Stone, seconded by Director Sebring. Any discussion on either of these 2 items? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Are there any opposed? None opposed, the motion carries.
And that concludes my report.
Thank you, Director Stone. Ms. Harrison.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The next item on the agenda is staff report, item SR1. That was the staff report that was distributed prior to Regional Services Committee this morning. And in that staff report, there is a recommendation. Let me just get to it. So, the recommendation.
Before we go to the recommendation, I've got Director Kuhn here. I was going to have Mr. Carruthers introduce this. Do you have something to say before the item's introduced? Director Kuhn?
I just wonder, why couldn't we have that earlier? Because the report says, date of the report 17th of May. I would have appreciated reading that beforehand, and we just got it now, so.
Mr.
And
Carruthers?
it's a pretty important decision, so.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. That was one of the issues I wanted to address to the board. As you can appreciate, that's not normally how we do business in terms of handing out a report just prior to the meeting. However, we've been operating under an extremely tight timeline. This funding program was announced a number of weeks ago. We were requested to submit a letter of interest, at which time Department of Fisheries and Oceans accepted our letter and provided us with 2 weeks to prepare a detailed proposal. We submitted the letter of intent based on the board's previous resolution regarding the Cowichan Water Use Plan that authorized staff to pursue funding opportunities to affect the implementation of the water use plan. However, we needed obviously to come back to the board for approval to submit this application. It's a very complex application. It involves a number of partners, and it has taken us literally to the 11th hour to get the financial aspects of the proposal put together. So it is with our apologies to the directors that it came at a late item, but we were under the timelines of the funding partners. I wanted to just articulate the importance of this. This is, I think this is a kind of an unprecedented opportunity for the Cowichan region to potentially get one step closer to addressing the water storage issue on Cowichan Lake and the Cowichan River. Step one was the Cowichan Water Use Plan. We always had felt, as partners with Cowichan Tribes, with Catalyst Paper, the Cowichan Watershed Board, that the next logical step in this process was to do the detailed engineering, the feasibility, as well as identifying the natural boundary of Lake Cowichan to support the water license application. This funding is available, I believe, potentially for a very short period of time. It is a federally funded program with provincial contributions, and so we have until Friday to get our application in, so it's important that we do that. The other thing I wanted to address specifically in the application was with respect to the financial arrangements associated with in-kind contributions of the partners. This funding program, unlike others that we're used to dealing with, has been done on very short notice. It is not detailed in terms of criteria or even in terms of what our local in-kind or local share of contribution may be. So we're putting this together on a sense of what they're looking for. Unfortunately for the regional district, as the directors are all aware, we operate in functions, and our funding silos are somewhat prohibitive to us just making funding allocation decisions on the fly. So it's been difficult for the CVRD to commit to in-kind contributions of our senior staff's time, given that those staff salaries are already committed to services. And so for us to arbitrarily make a decision or to make a commitment would require a budget amendment, and we don't have time to do that. So we had to submit the proposal with the CVRD recovering its costs associated with its project management of this initiative. In the future, if the board chooses to make other decisions, they're certainly welcome to do that. But at this point in submitting the application, we can only submit what we know, and what we know is the existing 2019 budget. So that's why it appears that the CVRD is, we've accounted for past contributions that we've made in this regard, and they're significant, as well as the contributions of our partners. But in terms of moving forward, the CVRD would be required to recover its costs through this funding program. So just wanted to provide that clarity and leave it to the directors and the board to consider it.
So I've got Director Yanni DiNardo, I've got Director Nicholson, Marsh, and Coons.
Point of order, Mr. Chair. Has this been moved and seconded?
I was going to move it.
It hasn't yet, no. I've just turned to Director Yanni DiNardo.
I was going to move it, but I also wanted to speak to it.
So we got moved by Director Yanni DiNardo, seconded by Director Marsh. Director Yanni DiNardo, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is where this grant thing is just so frustrating, and it's such a hamster wheel game, because we have been talking, especially in electoral areas, about, for us, getting back to basics, getting our work done, getting the workload ahead, getting our stuff done, and now we have to pull managers again away because they all of a sudden come up, and we have such capacity issues that it's a shame that we have to be completely shifted and adjusted for these things that come up. But you can't, the problem is you can't miss the opportunities, so they know they've got you. It's very, very frustrating. I just wanted to say that piece. Thanks.
Thank you, Director Nicholson.
Yeah, this is pretty exciting opportunity, and I'm fully in support of it. But I would like to make sure that we are successful. So, and I know that in-kind contributions are really important in the adjudication. So I am wondering if we can alter the budget allocation in the drinking water and watershed protection function to allow us to say that we are contributing additional, more CVRD staff time towards doing this project, so that there's more in-kind support. Because I'm not sure that 14% or 10%, I'm not quite sure whether it was 10 or 14% is actually gonna make it. You know, usually on these kind of things, big grant things, it's usually more up in the, 40% range.
Mr. Carruthers.
I'm going to make an observation here. This is a unique funding program in that its main focus is the preservation of salmon. Most of the granting programs that we deal with are infrastructure programs, and we're applying for funds to maintain our infrastructure that we own. I think there's been many arguments made that the protection of salmon is ultimately the provincial and federal government's responsibility. We certainly appreciate the importance, as with our partners, of salmon. However, we're putting a lot into this already in terms of moving this project forward. We've been given no clear guidelines around in-kind contributions. They've not even specified if they're required. We're putting a gesture forward in terms of saying we've got some skin in the game. To put more skin in the game, that would be entirely up to the board. Staff were not in a position to put that forward in our application. We're limited by our budget. It would require a budget amendment in order for you to commit to those kinds of funds, and I don't believe we have the time, but I believe Ms. Miller has something to add if we can, Mr. Chair.
If I may just...
Ms. Miller?
If I may just add one additional piece, as Mr. Carruthers has mentioned, this is something which is very, very dynamic. So this morning, for example, Catalyst came forward and provided some additional information in terms of their in-kind staff time as well, and that's in the region of 165,000 of staff time that will be dedicated to this project over the next few years. And while this program is focused in funding fisheries, local governments and communities also have collateral benefits. I mean, if we're looking at a summer here without water in the system by mid-July, that has impacts on our infrastructure as well. So there is some benefit for the organization. We are just constrained with regards to our ability to provide real defendable budget numbers to them at this time.
Okay, I'm going back to my list. I've got Director Marsh, followed by Kuhn.
So, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm not sure I'm following this correctly, so if someone could explain, Mr. Carruthers, if you could explain what you said about charging back under the grant. Did I get that right? That
Mr. Carruthers.
And when you write the grant, you're going to say, we're going to need to take some of the money to pay for this?
What the intent would be is that the CVRD recovers its project management costs through the project. So that would, the management of this project over the period, the lifespan of the project, would be recovered through funding from the grant.
So, do you know, this is provincial and federal grant money?
Federal. Yeah, correct.
So presumably, the province will, if the federal government doesn't know, the province will let them know, or it will be on the application, about our challenge with functions? Because I know we're the only province that has regional districts, right?
Yeah, I can't speak to that. I mean, we've put forward what we can, what we can reasonably put forward as an agency in terms of our in-kind contribution. Whether we articulate that in a covering letter.
I think that would be wise, but I'm not sure I understood. Do they want in-kind contributions, or do they want cash and/or in-kind contributions?
I can be corrected, but they have not specified normally a granting program will require a percentage of the funding to be
Yes.
provided by the proponent. We've not been given those numbers. I think we've been suggested that in-kind contributions would be helpful in our application, but we've been given no guidelines, specific guidelines as to what that number should be or must be.
So, yes, thank you. Is there a way that we could say to them, and I don't know if the board even has the will for this, but that we could say to them that we would need to have our money back, our portion back in this year, or if that isn't possible, we'd then have to go to the people, right? Or could we take it out of the 750,000 that we already have?
Ms. Miller wanted to.
I've got hands waving everywhere. I'll go to Ms. Miller. I was going to jump in here, but Ms. Miller?
If I may, the funder is trying very hard to help us be successful. So
Okay.
let's start with that. We're the only local government that has applied for this fund. All of the other applicants are either businesses or ENGOs or First Nations. And so they understand the complexity. They also understand why we're here the day before. Basically, the application has to go in because we need to follow our own processes. They understand this.
Great.
We've made it clear to them that the reason why we have to put in the full cost of project management, that we're not splitting it 50-50, is that we have to recover those costs. And so we are offering basically staff on a fee-for-service basis to this particular program. And that includes both the hiring of a dedicated project manager as well as the oversight of Dr. Hitani and myself.
And they understand, I forget my question.
So let me just jump in here. I want to go to Ms. Weiner first to give some clarification on our in-kind aspect of this, because it's very important as a regional district that we follow all of our rules. So I'm going to turn to Ms. Weiner, and if you can jump in here, please.
Well, it's unique for the regional district because our in-kind has to be measurable. We have to prove it. It has to have numbers attainable. So what they've allowed us to do is use our past numbers for projects we've done and stuff we've used up to date, which is actually unprecedented that I've ever heard of before that they've done this. So that's what's helped us build up that in-kind that we have. Because we're rushing and we're at the last minute putting this together, this morning we got information from Catalyst, which actually adds another 4% potentially to our in-kind. So, which is that $165,000. So right now, the numbers that we have are what the regional district can back up and stand behind with what we have. And that's how I would recommend putting the application forward versus dependent on a budget amendment, dependent on numbers or commitments that we can't make at this time.
Can I just ask one more thing?
Director Marsh.
Thank you. Through you to Ms. Miller. So will you be letting them know that this is, in case they've forgotten, the Heritage River?
Ms. Miller.
Absolutely. They've got a long business case that goes with this application.
I should have known. Thank you so much.
So I've got a list, but I'm going to go back to Director Nicholson here, but just to provide some context, and I would like to stand to be corrected if I'm not accurate on this sort of context assessment. But this was, from what I understand, a very hastily announced program, envelope of money. We all know that there's going to be a federal election in the fall. I believe they go to caretaker status at the end of June, so there won't be a lot of significant funding announcements made after that date. There was the letter that was sent in that was endorsed, and I believe there was something like 200 expressions of interest sent in. Handful came back. We are in a very rare group that were invited to put in a full presentation. And I think we were given 2 weeks. So it's a pot of money that is accessible. It's specifically for salmon. We are in a rare group that were invited to put in this proposal. And it's at the insistence of our staff that we go through the correct processes to ensure full support of the board and the other partners as well, but that it goes in as done right and that there won't be any unofficial subsidy of activities, that we're actually billing for it straight up front in the application. So it may seem a little hasty, but that's the funders' prerequisites, and it's going in Friday, and we don't have a lot of time to modify or dilly-dally in any way whatsoever. I can't believe I used the word dilly-dally, but we'll go to Director Nicholson to complete her remarks.
Thank you. Maybe I just need some clarity here. So do I understand that in this grant application, you can only claim in-kind stuff that's already been spent?
Ms. Weiner?
No, this isn't just in kind for work that's been done. We've got from Cowichan Tribes work that will be continuing. Their contribution of in kind is for work that will be going for ongoing forward. We also have it from Paper Excellence. We've got that money that's come forward, which will be for in kind going forward. But for the regional district to have a larger contribution to help build up that percentage, they've allowed us to also go back and use funds that we have already expended towards this.
So my question is, when we established the Drinking Water and Watershed Protection Service, I thought one of the purposes of it was to provide funding so that we could leverage grants and partnership programs. So I am not clear why we can't take, $12,000 or $13,000 a year for the next 3 years out of that service area and pay for the $48,000 for the project management expertise that we're providing, just so that we can up that percentage and make sure that we get this grant, which I think is absolutely critical.
Mr. Carruthers?
And Ms. Weiner can add to, we don't have that money budgeted. As I said, this application has to be in on Friday. We can only put forward what we have on the books. The strategic priorities for the Drinking Water and Watershed Protection Service has not been delivered to the board yet in terms of the board's direction as to how it's going to use those funds. As I said earlier, if moving forward through this process, the board wants to reallocate some funds through a formal budget amendment process or through the 2020 budget program, they're entitled to do that. We don't have the ability to do that today. So all we can submit is what we have and what we know we have in terms of our budgeted money, and that's the challenge.
Ms. Weiner, follow-up?
Just to expand on that, it's because the salaries have been allocated to those functions and are at those portions amount is why it can't be moved at this point in time, those salary allocations, where that's where the project management comes into it. And that's what's been defined in those functions for.
So, follow-up?
Just a follow-up comment. So this morning we discussed the Fisher Road issue, and now we're discussing another. These are important opportunities or issues that arise, and it's almost like we need to have a little bit of reserve funding put aside so that we can respond to these opportunities or issues that come along. Because, if every time we have to wait till the next budget year, I would hate for us not to get this. I'm sure we'll get this grant, but I would hate for us to miss out on things because we don't have that flexibility.
Mr. Carruthers?
I'll just say, under normal circumstances, we would have time to do budget amendments. We can reallocate funds out of reserves or out of an existing budget. The challenge here is that we were given 2 weeks to prepare an application, and we do not have time to take those procedural steps to make any kind of changes to our budget that would allow us to commit to a higher level of in-kind contribution, and we as staff don't have the ability to forecast what the board might do in the future. So as Ms. Weiner said, with the recent announcement from Catalyst, I believe we're up to 18% of total.
It would be 18% of the grant total, 14% of the total overall project.
And just some context, this is a fairly unique grant process, and at last year's FCM, we were looking at, I listened to Minister Sohi speak on trying to be able to get dollars, specific dollars into smaller communities and for specialized projects, and some of those discussions were 90%, 93%, sometimes 100% funding when you had partnership with First Nations. And my understanding is there hasn't been an indication of what the local contribution to this specific project would be. So before I go any further, I just want to check the list. I've got directors Kuhn, McGonigal, Acton, Wilson, Sebring, anyone else? Smith, and Marsh. Director Kuhn, the floor is yours.
Yes, I'd just like to get a little bit more into the details. So if the in-kind contributions are recognized, is there any other funding that the CVRD has to provide? So, and if the in-kind contributions are not recognized, then we'll have to come up with cash.
Nope.
No?
Mr. Chair,
So,
the
Mr. Carruthers.
the funder will either accept our application or they will deny it. You know, we've structured it so that the project management is paid for by the funding for the project. So we've not committed to any additional funds, nor would we be required to pay any additional funds.
You keep talking about funder. Who is the funder?
Mr. Carruthers.
The Salmon Restoration Fund, the
Okay.
federally funded
Okay.
program. Yeah.
Yeah, so there's no outlay of cash from the CVRD? Okay, thanks.
Director McGonigal. Director Acton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is obviously an important application, but I would like to bring up the point that Director Yanni DiNardo brought up, and I've seen this happen noticed it more in the last year before budget season, where things come up and then we agree to it, but we don't actually recognize what the consequence is going to be as far as staffing goes or other initiatives or other projects. So, and I think that's really important. It's hurt us a lot in the last year, and we're really feeling the effects now. So I would appreciate some way that we can kind of know, well, if we're gonna give this, then you might have to give up this, instead of it coming a couple months down the road and, oops, sorry, that's, something that was important to you is not gonna happen now.
Mr. Carruthers.
I think Director Acton makes a valid point, and that's why this report is in front of you, to get the board's blessing before we apply for these funds, because this will be a 2.5 year project. There's a lot of work involved, and we will be working with our partners. The CVRD will be taking a lead role with Mr. Atami and Ms. Miller being the CVRD's point people on this project. There is no doubt that it's going to take some resources. Although we will recover the costs of the project management. As long as I've been in this regional district for the last 5 years, this has been a priority for the previous board. That's why we've been working progressively on this initiative. Water storage options for Lake Cowichan were identified by the previous board's strategic plan, which is what's kept us moving in this direction. There will be some implications on our capacity in order to move this forward, and that's why the board gets to make those decisions around priorities.
Follow-up, Director Acton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And it's not only just priorities, it's kind of like the taxpayers and our budget is the bank, and you come with a business plan, you'd have a 5-year plan instead of just phase one, and we tend to approve phase one, but we don't have a great understanding of what it's gonna look like year 2, year 3, year 5, and moving into the future. And we all have good intentions, and we all wanna do what's good for the Cowichan Valley, but understanding what lies ahead, the phase 2 and the phase 3 would be nice to know as well, because does it just end here? Is that it?
Mr. Carruthers or Ms. Miller?
Well, that's a very good question from Director Acton. So we see this as step 2 of a 3-step process. Step 1 was the water use plan. Step 2 is the design, engineering, feasibility, all of the understanding of lakeshore property impacts, natural boundary survey on Lake Cowichan. The third and final phase would be applying for the actual grant funding to construct a new water storage structure on Lake Cowichan, basically replacing the weir. All of this is leading to that. We've been given every indication that there's interest, given that our water use plan was funded by the Clean Water and Drinking Water Fund. This potentially will be funded through the Salmon Restoration Fund, and we're optimistic that in 2 or 3 years' time, when the feasibility and design work is done, that we'll be in a position to apply to the federal and provincial governments for the actual funding required to replace the weir, and also to make some decisions around the water license and those kinds of issues that will unfold over the next 2 years.
Final follow-up question, Director Acton.
Final, thank you. So this is a big decision considering we got it this morning, and I understand that it's timely for Friday. Can we accept a grant and not accept it later? Or, can we apply for this grant? Like, I feel like this is I don't want to miss this opportunity, obviously, but we are making a huge commitment and decision, and to be able to look at it, the whole big picture would be nice. Is there some kind of amendment or to the will of the board, but it would be nice to be able to revisit this and completely understand what we're signing ourselves up to, and despite that it's been talked about at this table previously by other boards, but just a real good understanding of where we're heading and what we're getting into.
Ms. Weiner.
Through the Chair, Director Acton, this is just the grant application. There's usually an agreement in that point that comes afterwards. That being said, this way this program's going, it would probably need a quick turnaround on that point in time, but there's always another time to review. All the details usually come with that when they approve it.
Thank you. Director Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. One of the hallmarks of any successful business is the ability to adapt and react and measure any risk-reward implications that go with it. And the salmon life and resource cycle, if I've got it correct, is a major part of our ecology, which includes the seals, the orcas, and everything else. We know that that's not happening at the moment. This is something which has come up very quickly. I think it's wonderful. I think it's great. I commend the staff for the work they've done in the time that they've done it. And to be quite honest, I appreciate that the questions have to be asked. Let's go ahead and do it. Let's get it done and measure the problems later on. This is something we cannot afford to miss.
Thank you. Director Sebring.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Kudos to staff for the quick turnaround. As Director Wilson said, this is very constrained by time. I think we, as a board, can take some level of comfort at the end of the day. We have to approve whatever agreement flows from this, if indeed we get the funding. And that may be the opportunity to negotiate or do whatever needs to be done if there are concerns around this board table about the specifics of whatever strings are attached to this money. And that's something we can talk about then. This board needs to know that I had lunch with Chief Seymour last week, and we discussed this because he had just heard it was coming forward, and he asked whether my municipality would be willing to sign on with a letter of support. And we kind of broke protocol at North Cowichan because I don't write letters of support as mayor without the okay of my council, generally by resolution in a meeting, but we weren't having a meeting, so I sent an email to my council and I said, I want to write this letter. If I don't hear back from you, I will assume concurrence. And I heard back from 4 councillors who all agreed, and the other ones didn't hear back, so I can assume I have unanimous concurrence. So that letter was drafted this morning. Again, this is a moving target, and was sent to Mr. Carruthers at around 11:30 this morning on the assumption that if this board passes it, it becomes part of the package, and if it doesn't, it goes in the shredder. So let's pass it, please. Thank you.
Director Smith.
I think that this is an amazing opportunity, but I also have concerns over capacity for the staff. As electoral area directors, we're all struggling with our land use issues and the capacity within that area that we were all brought forward at the Electoral Area Service Committee meeting last week that showed that we have not the staff capacity at the moment to work and bring us up to date in that area. We're now headed into the engineering department, and whether we will have the capacity. We were brought a report with a $35 million price tag for our asset management. Where will that end up with the staff time? We have other areas that we're working towards, and I really have concerns about the staff capacity and how that deteriorates the CVRD function within our communities.
Thank you, Director Marsh.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate, I think it was Director Wilson who was talking about salmon as being a keystone species. And as I was listening to everybody's talk, I remembered the Cowichan Lake and River Stewardship Society post yesterday, which reports that the fry rescue operations in our creeks that are fed by the lake have begun in earnest. And Mead Creek is dry, and any remaining pools are barren. Mead Creek is traditionally one of the most productive tributaries, and we regularly see thousands of coho and chum fry there, but it's dry. Nixon Creek was checked last week and was dry, and pools there were similarly barren. The winter drought has taken a huge toll in these tributaries. And Ashburnham Creek, likewise dry, with only 30 coho fry that were rescued there, mostly yearlings. Sutton Creek apparently is flowing well and appears to be supporting coho fry. And the lower Robertson River yielded about 600 coho fry that were transported to Bear Lake. I think what I'm getting from this is that if, as well as the decimatingly low numbers, if we didn't have these folks out there rescuing these fry, we might not have these salmon. And I think earlier we heard from someone from the same group who, if I've got this right, 11 out of the last 12 years, the river was lower than normal, and 4 of those were in the last 5 years. So I agree we don't know what we don't know about what will be required, but I heard Ms. Miller say that if we get this grant, the way we've built in the payback, it's not going to be our present staff that's going to largely do this work. We're going to be hiring someone with the money if we get it to do the work. So I think that will only add to the capacity of our staff going forward to have other eyes and ears and expertise coming forward. And I looked up the Government of Canada website when I was listening to you all, the British Columbia Salmon Restoration and Innovation Fund, which this is, and it says right here on the first page, the federal government will provide 70% of the funding and 30% will come from the province of BC. I feel very confident. I feel in my bones that we will get this grant. But I also heard, once we get this grant, if the board doesn't like the terms, they could potentially turn it down. I don't know that would be the wise thing to do, but I think we should at least make the application. Staff has spent, we're talking about staff time, they've spent time doing this. And, you know, salmon, as I said earlier, is a keystone species. It doesn't just feed the orca and the other sea creatures, it feeds the forest and the mycelium and everything that makes this planet one. It's all interconnected. So I urge us to say, yes, please make this application. And I really want to thank staff for prioritizing it and getting it so thoroughly done in just a couple of weeks.
Thank you, Director Marsh. I'm just looking at my list here, and I might have skipped over Director McGonigal, or did I?
You did ask me, my point was covered, thank you.
Okay, thank you. So we've gone around once. I've got people on the list as well. I'd like to ask everyone to be succinct in their comments. I've heard a couple of murmurs for the question to be called already. So with that, I have Director Yanni DiNardo-Kuhn and myself. So Director Yanni DiNardo, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, the interconnected, I totally agree. I totally want to save the salmon the same way, but we are really struggling with capacity here, and this takes away from the EA, because this is our engineering, that we're already so stretched. But if we can look at it again, I'll support this, of course, but what I'm challenged with is when these grants come up and they're so frustrating, and how fast we have to make this decision. But we do get to have a second look, and it's just the balancing act that we've been doing in the electoral areas. That's my challenge. So that's what I'm trying to portray, not the salmon, because I want to protect the salmon as much as everyone else as well.
So I'd just like to remind everyone that environmental initiatives is a regional function and shouldn't be interfering and treading into electoral area specific only issues. So with that, I've got a couple of more names added to the list. I'll go to people that haven't spoken yet. I will go to Director Staples, followed by Kuhn, Nicholson, and myself. Director Staples.
Staff has worked and spent a lot of time on this, putting this together in a very short period of time, which leads me to indicate the importance that they place on this. And so I would love us to call the question on this, because I feel like staff has, in the process of developing this and bringing it to us, said that this is something that they believe needs to be done, and that they have the capacity through this to address some of the concerns that are coming up about that, with the extra person coming in. So I don't feel that well, I recognize capacity is always an issue. This will actually provide more capacity, and there is not one point on here that is not something that is important. But listening to the tourism people today and the economic development presentations today, you know, not to mention all the cultural significance, and I could go on and on and on the list of the importance of this. Staff time would, if we don't deal with this, will be diverted into dealing with the repercussions of us not dealing with this for decades to come. So I feel that this is a very wise thing for us to support.
I've had a request for the question to be called. I'm going to go to Director Kuhn and Nicholson. Do you have any new information you'd like to add to the discussion? Director Kuhn.
Just a quick one. We do like large projects and big projects that catch everybody's attention, and we've been caught up in that a few times now. And I'm not against this project, but it's another one of these big projects that requires a lot of staff time and a lot of attention. And I'd like to make just one point. Last night, I attended an APC meeting in my area. There was a lady who had applied a year ago to have her property zoned down from commercial tourist to residential, which is a very easy work to do. She's waited for a year. And that's what
Director
our
Kuhn,
state
relevance
is
to the question at hand, please.
Right. I
That's a
just want to
land
make
use
that
matter.
point because.
Thank you. Director Nicholson.
I just wanted to remind everyone that this is not just about us. We have partners who have worked extremely hard on this as well and are counting on this. So I think we need to be very serious about moving forward with this in support, full support.
Thank you, and just in summation, there's a lot of information has been brought to the table for us, and there's been a lot of excellent remarks made around this. I feel the pressure, the time to get this application submitted, and I too, like some of the directors around the table, have a very good feeling and a good sense about this. I've spoken with the executive director of the Watershed Board, who attended a meeting not too long ago where he felt very fortunate to be invited to put in the proposal. So I hope that we will be encouraged by this and be supportive of this. And with that, I am looking to call the question. Do we need the resolution read again? Has it been read? It's been moved and seconded. Call the question. All those in favor? Are there any opposed? None opposed, the motion carries. Director Acton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to request, I don't know if it needs to be a motion or anything, but just from the CAO, this is in no way to deny the grant in the future. This is just to have an understanding of how taking this initiative, what it will look like for us in the future, and how big a project it is, and what the consequences are to this year's budget and how we've allocated it. So even if it's just our CAO coming back to us in a meeting, you know, explaining how it might affect us, or an information meeting that we have as a board. So, and to understand phase 2 and phase 3 of this project.
I'd be very confident to suggest that part of the reason why we're here today discussing this is because of the insistence and due diligence of our staff to ensure that the board be very well informed. And I would expect no less from our staff in the future, that should we be successful, that we have every aspect of what this will mean to this board and the other partners involved to be fully informed, eyes wide open moving forward. And I look to Mr. Carruthers and ask if he sees it any differently.
No, Mr. Chair, and you know, what we can do is give you a little bit more of our sense of what this project, this phase, we break it into two. First one's been done. Water use plan, this is phase 2. Phase 3 will be the eventual construction of a new weir. I can't speak to that. I don't know what that will look like. I can't give you you know, I can give an educated guess, but we've got a lot of work to do over the next 2 years to get ourselves prepared for that. And what we could do is potentially give you a little bit of a fuller sense of what is involved in this particular project and the type of work that we'll be doing to give and how we'll be managing it.
Ms. Harrison.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The next item on the agenda, public hearings, there were none. Bylaws, item B1, recommendation before you is that CVRD bylaw number 4277, garbage and/or recyclables materials collection amendment bylaw 2019, be granted first, second, and third reading.
Moved by Director Stone, seconded by Director Yanni DiNardo. Any discussion? Seeing none, call the question. All those in favor? Are there any opposed? None opposed. That motion carries.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Number 2, that CVRD bylaw number 4277, garbage and/or recyclable materials collection amendment bylaw 2019, be adopted.
Moved by Director Sebring, seconded by Director Smith. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Are there any opposed? There's none opposed. That motion carries.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Item B2, that CVRD bylaw number 4279, Wilmot Road Drainage Service Amendment Boundary Extension for PID 009, excuse me, 428666. Bylaw 2019 be adopted.
Who's the Wilmot Road? Moved by Director Yanni DiNardo, seconded by Director Nicholson. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Are there any opposed? None opposed. That motion carries.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Item B3, that CVRD bylaw number 4280, solid waste management charges and regulations amendment bylaw 2019, be granted first, second, and third reading.
Moved by Director Stone, seconded by Director Marsh. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Are there any opposed? One opposed, the motion carries. Director McGonigal.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Item B3.2, that CVRD bylaw number 4280, solid waste management charges and regulations amendment bylaw 2019, be adopted.
Moved by Director Yanni DiNardo, seconded by Director Stone. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Are there any opposed? Director McGonigal, Director Kuhn, Director Sebring, that motion carries.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The next section are bylaws, electoral area directors only. Item BEA 1, that CVRD bylaw number 4267, development application procedures and fees bylaw 2019, be granted first, second, and third reading.
Moved by Director Yanni DiNardo, seconded by Director Acton. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Are there any opposed? There's none opposed, that motion carries.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Number 2, that CVRD bylaw number 4267, development application procedures and fees bylaw 2019 be adopted.
Moved by Director Acton, seconded by Director Yanni DiNardo. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Are there any opposed? There's none opposed, that motion carries.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Item BEA 2, number 1, that CVRD bylaw number 4268, electoral area F, Cowichan Lake South, Scotts Falls, zoning amendment bylaw, PID 009592954, 2019, be granted third reading.
Moved by Director Yanni DiNardo, seconded by Director Kuhn. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Are there any opposed? There's none opposed, that motion carries.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Number 2, that CVRD bylaw number 4268, electoral area F, Cowichan Lake South, Scotts Falls, zoning amendment bylaw 2019 be adopted.
Moved by Director Acton, seconded by Director Kuhn. Any discussion on this item? Seeing none, all those in favor? Are there any opposed? None opposed, the motion carries. Thank you all for that. Ms. Harrison?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Moving on to the new business section. Item NB1.
Yes, correspondence item.
The correspondence item, yeah.
Everyone have that?
It should be in your e-version. Do you see it?
Director Stone. Oh, sorry, Director Sebring. Would you like to be recognized?
Thank you. I'm pleased to see that this is here for information without a recommendation for a motion. This came to our council, and we had some discussion on it, and we just accepted it for information as well. If this organization is looking for funds on the basis that this is a case that's of interest to all local governments, that case can be made to UBCM, and they have a fund for that kind of thing, rather than dipping into the coffers of all local governments. I think this letter is going around to pretty much everybody in BC, but that's why we have this legal assistance fund at UBCM, if they deem it to be of broad interest. When Catalyst challenged our right to set tax rates at our discretion, UBCM helped fund that all the way to the Supreme Court. So I'm just pleased to see that this is here for information. I'd vote against any recommendation that we fund them. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further discussion on this item? Seeing none, receive for information. Question period. Is there anyone in the gallery like to pose a question to the chair?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On that last item, was that correspondence made available to the public, or is it just in an e-version to the directors?
I believe it's on the website.
Yeah, it's part of the agenda on the website.
That's part of the agenda.
Thank you. I would like to speak to the first, Mr. Chair, I would like to acknowledge that you had two delegates, or two persons here today, Mr. Yanni DiNardo and Mr. Tom Rutherford, and both very knowledgeable gentlemen in their respective fields. And would you agree, Mr. Chair, that their high praise of your staff is very much deserved? Your staff is deserving of that praise.
I take every opportunity to praise our staff when a job is well done and when others recognize their skills as well. I think it's a good thing.
It is a good thing. Thank you, sir. I would like to speak to the public engagement portion that was discussed at the Regional Services.
Questions are for this board's agenda?
It was on your board agenda because you approved it.
No, we did not. It was a recommended, it was not on today's agenda, was it? Or was it? No, it wasn't.
It was included in the minutes.
No, we had a regional services meeting this morning in which it was discussed and brought forward and was being implemented on a staff level. There was no recommendation as a policy to go forward to the board. I would stand corrected if, there we go. So that's off topic for this board meeting.
It's unfortunate that you're not availing yourself of an opportunity to involve the public in engagement. I would have offered a question period because I did speak to it at the input of that meeting, and I would have offered to speak to it during question period or ask my questions, but I wasn't given that opportunity because, like at the public input, I had to request an opportunity to speak. This side of the gallery was not asked for input, and I am very firmly believe that public input to this board is important, and I hope that you would agree to that. And I would take the opportunity to stand back and let other people that come to speak to you have an opportunity to be heard.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to pose a question to the chair on today's agenda? Seeing none, I believe we have a closed session. So a motion to go into closed session. Moved by Director Stone, seconded by Director Kuhn. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. The motion carries. 5 minutes.